At the Smithsonian Museum, the National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C., there's a jazz orchestra there. And the orchestra was established in 1990 for the purposes of really being a living exhibit. Not only does the Smithsonian Institution collect dinosaur bones and old artifacts, artwork, but it collects sheet music. So this orchestra was created for the purpose of looking at that sheet music and recreating it as close as possible to approximate the original presentation of it, and it's to place it in a certain place in history. So my job as artistic director, as opposed to being the conductor, is to identify historically significant jazz programs to present for the Smithsonian.
And it's quite a task there because it's a lot involved in not just the organization, but actually the continued building, perpetuating the music in an institution that it needs to be preserved and celebrated and educated.
From the very first days that I started playing music, I was aware of the necessity to educate myself. I mean, I had to figure out what excellence was, and not having a private teacher, I had to figure out how to acquire that. And I never really compared myself musically to those around me. I always compared it to the best I'd ever heard on recordings. You know, in fact, I was unconcerned with how others around me played. So the necessity to seek information is, I'm just wired that way. And to have the opportunity to engage with youngsters, others, you know, it's really just most amazing opportunity. In fact, I think probably one of the best aspects for myself of being a musician is music really is the tool that's utilized that provides the conduit for me to engage with people on a much more deeper level. And as a result, I have a certain interest and high charge to dealing with youngsters to give them the best information I know, which means that I have to constantly be evaluating what I'm giving them. Also, to be able to look at what they bring to the table and, what I've learned from the students. You know what I mean? So, and all of this is through this tool of utilizing music. So for me, the older I've gotten, the longer I've been in this business of playing music, it's all become part of the same thing. Whether I'm on the bandstand, actually just simply playing, I have a high level of interest in being authentic and being honest and giving the best performance I can, equally to the way I do when I'm in a classroom or during the times when I do lecture performances. But it's always for myself an effort to heighten my own awareness, my own knowledge base, and to be able to best I can leave the audience with something a little different than they showed up with, whether it be student audience or whether it be a professional.
Teaching, as I see it, is a reflection of your ability to be able to convey a message, and which means that you have to do an inventory of yourself and your ability to be able to convey that message. So for me, the greatest joy in teaching is actually seeing the student embrace, or at least the light bulb go off, where they see this idea, this thought, this cell, whatever that moment is, becomes something that they take ownership to and they make it their own. Be it simple as a melody, a rhythmic concept, whatever it may be. But once that light bulb goes on and they recognize that this is something that is of value to them, it gives me that sense of fulfillment that I've been able to connect in a meaningful way. That's anything in any education environment. You want to be able to connect with your audience and your audience be that student in a meaningful way. And not impassive, and those are the moments that I cherish most, when I actually see that there's a tangible result.
I have gotten to a point, I've learned this, probably much of this from my students, to not put my concept of good high-level art in my era, and realize that music and so many things around us, particularly definitely the arts, are a reflection of our culture. Listen to music in nightclubs. At one time, that was a big thing. And in fact, jazz music at one time was somewhat popular. Rightfully so, with technology and technological advances and this world we live in today, that deals with students, and we all are juggling so many different things that we didn't have to juggle 20 years ago, let alone 50 years ago when I, 60 years ago when I was a kid. So rightfully, music is doing exactly what it is supposed to do. As far as how does technology benefit or hurt potentially youngsters, I don't necessarily recognize it in a negative, because it's a different world, and there's nothing particularly special about being a musician, particularly. I mean, it's just something that I chose to do, or it chose me, But I had the opportunity to sit and talk with some Marines at the Marine Ball a couple of years ago. I went with my niece, and I talked about him. I thanked him for his service and all that, and we had a wonderful conversation about his vantage point when people say that to him. And he said, Charles, I got to tell you, he said, everybody has a charge in life. Him being a soldier is what he does. He said, but your music and what you do is equally as important. The man who picks up the trash is equally as important. So it's not qualitative. It is we all have a role, a purpose here on this planet. And so there's nothing special about what he's doing, and I kind of love that,
It's always important to see music played live. And that becomes really, for a lot of us, that point of inspiration, that reason to go back into that room, the isolated room there where you are making an inventory of your abilities and inabilities, and continue to find those ways to grow as a musician, and find that inspiration to come back that next day. But a lot of it comes in those beginning stages from seeing live music and seeing how it's done in a way through a master or somebody who has a great proficiency, and gives you that sense of hope and inspiration to want to also aspire to that, but understanding about how it's done, demystifying it. The demystification by seeing it in a live performance versus hearing it on a recording, and then also having the opportunity to talk to that artist, which is important too, seeking out those artists in your local community and creating that relationship and that bond. That becomes that catalyst for going back and continuing to grow and practice and learn and aspire to be a better musician or better player. Goals are important because it gives us a measuring stick, on a daily measuring stick, to see how we're going and being able to reflect back. If you don't have the goals there, you can't see that growth, or it's going to be hard to. And those goals should be reasonable also, and not that next year I'm going to be the best alto saxophonist in the world. Those are unrealistic, but setting those goals there that are achievable, and then continuing to set new goals. In any growth, in any area of life, goals are really quite critical to be able to help one see the personal growth, that point of inspiration to continue to develop, and also help identify those areas that need more work, that are considered to be maybe a point of weakness in one's ability, to be able to address those honestly and then continue to work on those in a way that will create that sense of growth. It's amazing, once you do that and you start going down that path, it becomes easier and easier to go down and practice, because you find that sense of personal gratification that you've done this and you see that growth. It then opens up the doors for many more opportunities outside of the practice room in a way that would not have been there. But it's early goal setting really is a critical. I think that sometimes it's lost. Setting the goals and writing them down, actually physically writing them down and say, these are my goals, and reviewing them on a daily basis, and then continuing to use that as your measuring stick there.
There's an absolute concrete way that you can see progress every day. And I do believe that utilizing this process, you will see progress and recognize it. First of all, before practicing, let me back up. Even as all the years that I've been playing music, the longer I've played, the more I recognize all these things that I don't know. I just did a program last week at the Kennedy Center dealing with classical music, where having to play quarter tones and play multiphonics on the saxophone. I had to learn a whole system of fingerings that I had never utilized. I utilized the Western harmony. So it opened the door reminded me once again, I only know what I know. And the more I realized that, the world is open up to all these things that I don't know. Now, if I want to progress, I can't look in those world of things that I don't know and be paralyzed by all of these things just oscillating between one thing and the other. I have to identify one of those things that I want to learn and focus on that one thing. So my point being, when a student takes his instrument out of the case, just like I do now when I practice, and I practice daily, I have decided before I start practicing what one or two things in that big sea of things that I can't do, what one or two things that I want to learn that day. And what I often do is, and I suggest to students to do, we all have a lot of things we can't do. Look at the least complex of those things, those simple things that we can't do, and work on that one. Don't work on the most complex of those things. Look at the least complex of those things that you're familiar with, that you can't execute, and let that be the practice for that day. You might not get through the whole thing. It might be just 2 or 3 bars, but focus on the least complex, because it's easier to attach that least complex thing to the things you already know than it is this real complex thing that will overwhelm you. And if you utilize that process on a daily basis, at the end of every practice session, you will see progress. Where you won't see progress if you have 5 or 6 or 10 different things that you're going back and forth between and never focusing on one thing. It might be just one measure of music. Your goal today is, because this challenging part in the piece I can't play. And so instead of practicing the whole thing out many times, go to that challenging piece, part of it, and go through it very, very, very slowly to where your brain starts to record correct information. The goal is not to necessarily during that practice session to be able to play that tempo, but to be able to play it correctly. Guarantee when you finish practicing that day, you'll do it better than you did when you first took the instrument out of the case. And if you pick your instrument up and then do it again in another few hours, maybe tomorrow, and repeat that again just to confirm that you can do this at the tempo you played yesterday. Maybe increase the tempo, maybe go just a little bit further in the music, but be clear, crystal clear about what the goal is for the day, rather than just randomly, I'm going to practice today.